So this is done. This now we know that what are the coexisting conditions with a person who is obese. Now we have to understand, see, bariatric surgery is one treatment option available for such obese people. All right. Bariatric surgery helps in causing significant amount of weight loss. All right. It improves all these comorbid conditions. So after the person undergoes bariatric surgery, actually the weight decreases, the diabetes gets reversed, the hypertension improves. There are a lot of benefits. Okay. Bariatric surgery is advised for patients who have a BMI more than 35, not less than 35. All right. So, and laparoscopic bariatric surgery is more preferred than open, obviously, because laparoscopic, it will be less pain, early mobilization. So, it has its own benefits. All right. The bariatric surgery itself, there are three types. So, the first type is going to be what is known as a restrictive bariatric surgery. So, restrictive surgery is in which the gastric binding is there, sleeve gastrectomy is there. All right. And there is the benefit of this is that there is less incidence of nutritional deficiencies in this. Okay. Because intestine sections are not removed. So that's why the incidence of having nutritional deficiencies is much less over here. So what happens after this bariatric surgery? Patient will have early satiety. All right. And ultimately his calorie intake will come down and his weight will reduce. Then there is malabsorptive, the name itself, malabsorptive bariatric surgeries. So in these types of surgeries, a portion of the small intestine is removed. Now, if you remove a portion of small intestine, obviously your nutrition absorption is going to get affected, right? So these patients are very prone for then after surgery, they can develop anemia, they can develop deficiency of fat soluble vitamins, okay, A, D, E, K. All right. They can have protein calorie malnutrition. And then the last type is, which is the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, which is known as combined bariatric surgery. So this is a very major kind of surgery, longest hospital time, longest hospital stay. Okay. So what now, we are anesthetists. We don't actually need to know exactly what steps are being done, but we need to know that when this bariatric surgery patient comes back to us for some other surgery, okay, after undergoing bariatric surgery, maybe after 1 to 2 years, he's got a fracture, he needs orthopedic surgery or he needs some other surgery. We need to be aware that, okay, he's undergone bariatric surgery. In the surgical history, we will elicit, right? So we should know that because the patient is prone for developing deficiency of fat soluble vitamins, which means it includes vitamin K. So these persons can develop chronic vitamin K deficiency. Vitamin K deficiency means what? It's affecting the clotting factors, right? It's affecting the clotting system. So the patient will have abnormal prothrombin time. Okay, prothrombin time is abnormal. So if this person comes for an elective surgery, I can give him vitamin K supplementation, and over the next 24 hours, I can correct his prothrombin time. I don't need to do anything, just give him vitamin K supplementation. But if this person comes for an emergency surgery, okay, suppose he has come with a emergency such as maybe it's an obstructed hernia, you cannot delay the surgery. You cannot wait for optimization. So this time you will mobilize fresh frozen plasma, you will transfuse to the patient, and you can correct the prothrombin time. All right. That is, and you know that this patient has undergone bariatric surgery, so you expect probably he has low HP. He might be having nutritional anemia. Okay. So that is why we should know what are the nutritional deficiencies which can occur in a patient who is undergoing bariatric surgery. So when we come across such a patient for future surgeries, we are well prepared. Okay. Now, the next part that we come is anesthesia management, okay, for these obese persons, right? So when an obese person comes to you for evaluation for any surgery, be it bariatric surgery or any other surgery, okay, let it be any surgery. So pre-op evaluation, you know from the past, whatever we have learned, that cardiovascular system is impaired and respiratory system is mainly impaired. Okay. So we have to really focus on these systems. So when we ask first the patient for cardiopulmonary system, we will ask him for some kind of history, right? So in your pre-op evaluation, you'll ask for history of chest pain, breathlessness, decreased effort tolerance, palpitations, fatigue, syncope. So all your signs and symptoms that are related to cardiac system, you will ask him. All right. And you will also ask him to fill a questionnaire. What is this questionnaire? It is a questionnaire to understand whether the patient is suffering from OSA or not. Okay. And is he prone for OSA and what is his risk? So there is something known as a stop band questionnaire. Have you heard about this? Any idea?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So there is this questionnaire called stop bang. It's a very easy questionnaire. So stop means snoring. So patient, you have to ask the patient, do you have snoring when you sleep? Yes, no. Do you have daytime tiredness? Yes, no. Has anybody observed you snoring? Has observed apnea, sorry. Has anybody observed you going into apnea while you were sleeping? Yes, no. Okay. Then, do you have high BP pressure? So P stands for pressure, which is high BP. So you will check for the patient if the patient is having high BP. B, you will check for the BMI of the patient. All right. So if the BMI is more than 35, yes, you include this as 1 point. Then you see the age of the patient. How old is the patient? Is the patient more than 50 years old? Then yes, plus 1 point. Then you will see for the neck circumference. You will see neck circumference. Is it more than 40 centimeters? Yes, add 1 more point. What is his gender? Is he a male? Yes, add 1 more point. So, like that, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 points scoring. So, every parameter is 1 point in the form of yes and no. Okay. So, if the patient is having 0 to 2, any of these two, that means he is in a low risk for OSA. If the patient is having 3 to 4, he is an intermediate risk for OSA. If it is having more than 5 of these are present, that means he's at a high risk for OSA. So this is something you should be doing in your PAC OPD, all right, when you're going to evaluate the patient before surgery. Okay. Now, next, what you want to check for the cardiovascular system, we know, yes, patient could have high BP. We learned systemic hypertension. So you'll ask the patient, history of systemic hypertension is there? Yes, no. Okay. And if the patient is having systemic hypertension, is he taking any medications? All right. Next, you know that the patient is prone for right heart failure, left heart failure. Look for the symptoms of right heart failure. You will see, is the JVP distended right heart failure now, right? So is the JVP distended? Is the patient have hepatomegaly? Does he have splenomegaly? Does he have pedal edema? Does he have ascites? Check this in your history and your examination, right? Then you see features for suggestive of left heart failure. So you will see, do you have crepitation? Does he have any pink frothy sputum expectorate, right? Does he have orthopnea, paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea? Okay. So this will divert you towards a diagnosis of probably having left heart failure. Then what will you investigate now that you have seen this cardiac system? You check for hypertension, you check for heart failure. Okay. Past history of any chest pain will tell you what, okay, probably he has a coronary artery disease, history of angina. Okay. So like that, from based on what we have learned, we have to implement. So then after you have done the examination and the history taking, you will suggest some investigations. So you will go for ECG. ECG will tell you what he's having any left ventricular strain pattern or what. Is he having any arrhythmias, right? Is he having any feature suggestive of any past myocardial infarction? So you'll ask for an ECG. You will ask for a chest X-ray. Why? Because you might see pulmonary plethora, right? You will see pulmonary congestion. It might be seen. Okay. You might have increased bronchosvascular markings. You might see cardiomegaly because of left ventricular, right ventricular failure. Okay. So this is what you will look for in X-ray. Then you might ask for a patient for 2D echo. 2D echo will tell you what ejection fraction. It will tell you about the status of all the 4 chambers. It will tell you about if the patient is having pulmonary hypertension or not. Correct. Then you will do a baseline ABG on room air to understand at room air what is his PaO2. So that intra-op we can manage our PaO2 accordingly. All right. Now you know that so you do an ABG. All right. Then if the patient is having any OSA, diagnosed OSA, you'll ask him, are you taking CPAP, BiPAP at home? Yes. Okay. Then bring it on the day of surgery to the hospital. Okay. Then you will see for diabetes, right? Because we know patient is prone for diabetes. So you look for diabetes and diabetes related signs and symptoms, such as peripheral neuropathy, autonomic neuropathy. All right. You will ask the patient, is he taking any medications for diabetes, right? And then accordingly, you'll advise pre-op optimization. For diabetes per se, what investigations you'll ask? You'll ask for the fasting blood sugar, postprandial blood sugar, HbA1c, RFT, right? Because kidneys get involved in diabetes. You'll ask for RFT, you'll ask for serum electrolytes. Okay. Now, these patients are also prone for GERD, gastroesophageal reflux. Some of these patients are prone for reflux. Okay. So if they give a history of heartburn, they give the history of coughing, acid reflux, then you have to just ask them, are you on any antacids? If they are on any antacids like proton pump inhibitors, okay, then you have to ask them to continue. Okay. And if they have not started it, you have to advise it in your pre-op. Okay. Then very important in our examination, airway examination, right? So you will see he's having fat, chubby face, chubby cheeks, okay? Short neck, thick neck circumference, you will measure at the level of the thyroid cartilage. All right. You will look for what? MPC, right? You will look for mouth opening, because these people have got fat collection in tongue also. So the laryngoscopy might be difficult. Okay, mandibular space might be less. It cannot accommodate probably the tongue. They will have a large tongue. Okay, then you have to look for thorough airway examination is necessary. Okay, then what you have to see whenever you examine the airway of the patient, you have to see for 5 difficulties. 5 difficult. Okay, so difficulty is what? Is it difficult mask ventilation? Is it a difficult laryngoscopy intubation? Is it a difficult supraglottic airway device? Could there be difficult front of neck access? Or could there be difficult extubation? Whenever you examine a patient's airway, you have to keep these 5 difficulties in mind. And then you have to plan and you have to anticipate. Okay, I'm anticipating difficulty in these parameters. All right. So you have to do that over here as well. So far, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Then you have to ask for certain other additional investigations, like you will ask for LFT. Why? Because there will be fatty infiltration, right, of the liver. So that might impair the liver function. So you have to do liver function test. All right. And you will also ask for a lipid profile. So whenever you even have this patient for practical exam, or even you're writing a theory exam, you have to mention this in a stepwise how you will examine, assess the patient, and then what investigations will you ask and why are you asking these investigations. All right. Then in the
Yes.
pre-op, you will give certain advices to the patient, right? So the patient is continuing CPAP, BiPAP at home. You will tell him, bring it to the hospital. Okay. You will ask him to omit, take care of certain things before surgery. So omit oral hypoglycemic agents before surgery, right? Omit ACE inhibitors, angiotensin receptor blockers, anticoagulants, NSAIDs, as usual. How we optimize any other patient. And what we'll ask him to continue before surgery. So we'll ask him to continue his antacid, continue his proton pump inhibitors, continue DVT prophylaxis. Very important. Many of these patients, once they come for surgery to the hospital, usually they are given low molecular weight heparin prophylactic dose to prevent DVT because of their immobilization, the increased risk for developing DVT, right? So increased risk for DVT, pulmonary embolism. So prophylactic low molecular weight heparin is started, or compression stockings are given. So that has to be continued even till the day of surgery. So if you are giving DVT prophylaxis in the form of low molecular weight heparin, so that can be omitted prior to surgery, but you will continue with the compression stockings. Okay, the sequential compression stockings. Then you will also ask the patient to continue his CPAP, BiPAP overnight before the surgery. So surgery is in the morning. Overnight, you will encourage the patient use your CPAP, BiPAP machine. Okay. Now, intraoperatively, what are some parameters that are of concern to us? So there are specialized operating tables for these patients. These patients are really obese, right? So a normal operating table might not be able to bear the weight. So there are special operating tables. Additionally, you should be able to transfer the patient laterally from the trolley onto the table carefully without causing any harm to the patient, right? So there are special devices known as air transfer mattress device, which ensures that patient can be safely shifted onto the OT table. Okay. When you shift the patient to the OT table and you position the patient for surgery, you have to ensure pressure point padding is done very well, because these patients are very prone to pressure necrosis. All right. And arms of the patient, because the arms are really huge. So you keep them in the neutral position along the side of the body. All right. And then you strap the patient to the OT table so that the patient does not slip off from the OT table. All right. Now, what will you choose for anesthesia when you want to give anesthesia? Will you choose regional? Will you choose GA? Right? For any procedure, you have options, right? Regional or GA. So if you choose to go for regional, it's a very good method, right? Why? There are many benefits of regional. So what is the benefit? You will have intra-op analgesia, you will have post-op analgesia, right? Your requirement for opioids is less, because these patients are already very prone for respiratory depression, and once you give opioid, the respiratory depression get in worsen. So we actually want to avoid opioids. So regional is a very good option. All right. What is the problem that we have with regional? Because of so much fat, the landmarks are really not good. So to approach the particular site for giving regional anesthesia will be difficult by anatomical landmark technique. So we should always prefer to use ultrasound. So with the help of ultrasound, and maybe you might have to use a little extra long needles, you can easily approach the bundle of nerves that you want to block, and you can give regional anesthesia. All right. Now, what about spinal and epidural? It comes under regional anesthesia. So overall, the drug dose requirement of spinal and epidural is reduced by 20% in these obese. Why is there weight is increased, but the drug requirement has decreased. That is because of epidural fat collection. Okay, there is epidural fat collection plus there is epidural venous engorgement, right? Venous engorgement is occurring. Why? Because of fat collection in the abdomen. So intra-abdominal pressure is more. So therefore, that reflects back as epidural venous plexus gets distended. Okay. Hence, the space which is available, epidural space, as well as the space for which the CSF is there, is less. So less drug is required for spinal and epidural. So is this understood?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Now for GA, so we have got some concerns for GA. So we usually give a pre-medication to the patient, right? Patients are very anxious before surgery. So then we give them pre-medication with what? Midazolam. So midazolam use is very controversial in obese patients. You should try to avoid using it. Okay. Then the patient, you should always have your emergency airway cart ready. So what will you have in your emergency airway cart? Because the airway is a difficult airway because of obesity. So you should have your supraglottic airway devices. You should have a stellate. You should have oral airway, nasal airway, video laryngoscopes if available in the institute, fiber optic bronchoscopes. Okay, so all these equipment should be available for use at the time of airway manipulation, including emergency drugs. All emergency drugs should be available. Then when you take this patient for surgery, and suppose the patient has come for some surgery where already, there's an obese person with burns of the neck and contracture and limited mouth opening, and it's a very risky. Already obesity is a problem. Additionally, there's another issue. So to be on the safer side, you should have an ENT surgeon awake fiber optic is in one option, and you should also have an ENT surgeon standby for front of neck access in case you cannot secure the airway. All right. So if it's a very difficult airway, you can keep an ENT surgeon standby for the front of neck access. Now, when you take this patient for GA, you have to pre-oxygenate this patient very well. Okay. So pre-oxygenation for at least 5 to 8 minutes. Okay. So I'll just put a few points over here about pre-oxygenation. All right. So pre-oxygenate in what position? In propped up. Patient has to be propped up more than 30 degree. Okay. And it should be given with a CPAP of 10. Correct. And for 5 to 8 minutes with how much oxygen? 100%.
100%.
So this will help us to, now we are done with pre-oxygenation. So our next step will be what? Intubation, right? So when we want to intubate the patient, we want optimum sniffing position. So sniffing position was oral, pharyngeal, laryngeal axis all have to be in line. That is sniffing position, optimal sniffing position. How we will get that? We will get that by RAM position in obese. So RAM position, you will fold some sheets and you will place it behind the upper thorax, okay, behind the shoulder, okay, and below. So what will that cause? That will cause the patient to come in a position something like this. Below the head, you will keep a pillow, and below the shoulders, you will keep some wedge or you will keep some sheets. That will bring your external auditory meatus, all right, in line with your sternal notch. So sternal notch and external auditory meatus, okay, should be in the same plane, in the same horizontal plane. All right. When this is in the same horizontal plane, it will ensure that you have good visibility for intubation. All right.
Yes.
Okay. Now, once you have intubated the patient, okay, and now the case has started. So you are advised to keep a PEEP of at least 10 centimeters of water. All right. When you want to open, now we had done that in respiratory system. So you will do recruitment. Okay. So I'll just put those points back over here for recruitment. Okay. So recruitment is something which should be done for obese patients. So if a patient has a BMI of more than 40, okay, so a BMI of more than 40, with how much airway pressure will you recruit? So recruitment will be done with a peak airway pressure of 55. Okay, so recruitment is what? You will close the valve, you will ensure that the peak airway pressure is brought to 55. You will give a tidal volume breath for high tidal volume breath for 7 to 8 seconds. So your peak airway pressure is achieved till here and your alveoli will open. If the BMI is less than 40, so how much peak airway pressures will you achieve? You will, for others, you will take a peak airway pressure of 40. So basically, if the BMI, the cutoff is 40. So 40 BMI, more than 40 BMI, you will achieve a peak airway pressure of 55. And less than that, you will take a peak airway pressure of 40 centimeters of water and you will do recruitment. So far is okay. So this will open the alveoli and then you add a PEEP. You'll add a PEEP of 10 centimeters. So I guess this is quite clear since the beginning. All right. If you increase the PEEP more than 20, so you can increase the PEEP more. If you go more than 20, it will start affecting your cardiac output. Okay. So we do not have, so we should not increase the PEEP so much. Okay. Now, once suppose the case is over now, so what will you wait for? You will wait for the patient to have spontaneous respiratory efforts. You should see for this thing, muscle tone and the muscle power, right? You have to see for head lift more than 5 seconds. You have to see for the, your train of 4. All right, neuromuscular monitoring before you plan to extubate such patients, because these patients are very prone to going apnea after extubation. Okay, so you have to ensure adequate tone and reversal and then only extubate the patient. If you have any doubts, you can put something known as airway exchange catheter. So AEC, airway exchange catheter, can be inserted through the tube, and over that you can remove the tube, and the airway exchange catheter is well tolerated by the patient, so it can be left in place for an hour or two till you're sure that the patient is completely awake, and then you can remove it. Okay. Additionally, when you want to extubate the patient, so now you bring the patient to spontaneous mode right before extubation. So when you bring the patient to, when he's spontaneously breathing, you will give pressure support. When the patient is spontaneously breathing, you will give pressure support, you will give a PEEP. All right. And then after extubation, you can insert the nasopharyngeal airway also. So the nasopharynx, which is you insert an airway, so it prevents the fall of the soft tissue and keeps the airway patent. And nasopharyngeal airway is very well tolerated. Okay. And you can give oxygen supplementation and continuous saturation monitoring has to be done. Okay. And the patient has to be given 30-degree propped up. At the time of extubation, 30-degree propped up is compulsory, has to be given. Okay.
Yes.
Now, so we have understood about the airway related problems. Okay. There are other issues also. So intraoperatively, when the patient is there, since the patient is obese, you have to use a BP cuff, which is of a proper size. If you use a small BP cuff, like a normal adult BP cuff, it can overread. Okay. So you need a proper sized BP cuff. Sometimes what happens is BP is not measured well. NIBP reading is not accurate in these obese patients. So it may require that you insert an invasive BP line. Okay, so arterial BP monitoring might be required in such patients. Then even the patient for venous access is very difficult in such patients. All right. So preoperatively only you should assess the patient and see for venous access. If the patient doesn't have a good venous access, you definitely should go ahead with the central line. Okay. This central line insertion, again, because of anatomical difficulty, it will be difficult. So it is better that it is performed under ultrasound guidance. So whatever interventional procedures are to be done, it's always preferred that you do it under ultrasound guidance. Okay. Then during the surgery, if the surgery is a very long duration surgery, a little high risk surgery, then many people prefer, because they want to check for the pulmonary pressures. Okay. So intrapulmonary pressure monitoring they want to do. So what they do is they insert a transesophageal echo. Okay. A TEE probe. So transesophageal echocardiography is done. A TEE probe is there, which is inserted orally into the esophagus, and then you can get view of the heart. Okay. So or else what you can also do is you can also insert a pulmonary artery catheter. So a PA catheter is inserted through the same IJV port. Okay. So preoperatively, if you want to get access, you want to pulmonary pressure monitoring you want to do, then you can also do it with the help of pulmonary artery catheter. So you can insert it through the right IJV, okay, in the pre-op area, and through that, what is our advantage? You can even check the pressures also. You can pulmonary pressures, you can get the central venous pressures also. Plus, you can also have a central access, venous access through it. Okay, so there are multiple benefits of inserting it. Then there are patients who have a very high risk for developing thromboembolism. Okay, even during the surgery, they have venous stasis in the lower limbs, and they can develop deep vein thrombosis. And at the end of surgery, they can actually develop pulmonary embolism. So if that is a very high risk surgery, especially in bariatric surgeries, what they do is, because they will insert a filter. All right, they will insert an IVC filter which will, if in case any thrombus forms, the IVC filter will prevent the thrombus from entering into the circulation. All right, it will be restricted over there itself. So prophylactically, IVC filter is inserted in many situations. Again, for IVC filter insertion, the approach from the right IGV from a central line. Now, you have to also ensure that the patient is warm enough during the surgery. He should not get cold, right? So there are forced air warmers. You are supposed to apply that as well. And you have to always remember pressure point padding is very essential and should be done properly. Now, what we need to understand is about the drug pharmacokinetics and obesity. All right. So there is something known as TBW, total body weight. Okay. So it is the weight of the person complete, lean body weight also, plus the fat component. Then you have the ideal body weight. Okay. So ideal body weight is what? It is the ideal that should be there for that person of that age and that gender. Okay. So if you want to calculate an ideal body weight for a male, so it is counted as whatever their height is in centimeter minus 100. That is an ideal body weight for a male. And for a female, we take it as height in centimeter minus 110. So this will give you the ideal body weight. Then you have something what is lean body weight. Okay. So lean body weight, it is the body weight which is excluding the fat. All right. So it is considered as 1.3 times into, this is a very simple formula. 1.3 times into ideal body weight will give you the lean body weight. Okay. Now, in obese persons, what it has been seen is that although there will be fatty liver, the hepatic clearance of the drug is not affected much. Okay. Unless if the patient is having some heart failure and liver blood flow is affected, then the functionality of the liver will be affected. Otherwise, hepatic. These patients also have increase in the renal blood flow, increase in the GFR. So that means what? The kidney elimination is quite good, increased renal clearance of the drugs. Then what is seen is that the cardiac output has increased. As I told you, every 1 kg increase in fat will increase the cardiac output by 100 ml per minute. Increase in the plasma volume. Okay. So initially, what the drug that you give, okay, it's based on the lean body weight so that you can achieve the plasma concentration. If you give as per ideal body weight, you might not be able to achieve plasma concentration. So you have to give the initial dose as per the lean body weight. Okay. And then subsequent doses are given based on how the response of the initial loading dose was. So now drugs which are highly lipophilic, so highly lipophilic drugs, you have got propofol, benzodiazepines, which means midas, right? You have barbiturates, which I mean is thiopentone. Okay. Then you have atracurium. You have cisetra. Then you have fentanyl and sofentanil. Now, what we have to understand is that because these drugs are highly lipophilic, the volume of distribution of these drugs has increased. They have increased volume of distribution, all these drugs. Obviously, because the fat component has increased. So if we want to achieve for initial dosing, the initial dosing load, okay, so initial dosing for such drugs, we will take based on which parameter? Any guess? Total body weight, ideal body weight, or lean body weight?
Lean body weight.
No. So here, initial dose is taken by the total body weight.
Okay.
Because there are so many fat stores, right? So volume of distribution has increased. So plasma concentration will not be achieved because of that, because these are lipophilic drugs. They will go and attach very quickly to the fat. So hence, induction dose has to be the initial dosing that is there, so based on total body weight. Okay. Subsequent dosing, that is a maintenance dose. Okay, so the maintenance dose that you will give will be based upon the ideal body weight or lean body weight.
Okay.
So, one point I want to clarify. So, I have prepared this lecture from Stoltings. Okay. Stolting's textbook tells that the maintenance dose which is there should be based upon the lean body weight. Okay. Whereas there is a article in British Journal of Anesthesia. Article name is Pharmacokinetics in Obese Patient. So that article is telling it should be based on ideal body weight. So I'm telling you both. Okay. One source is telling ideal body weight, the other source is telling lean body weight. Okay. Now, there is only one thing about propofol, which is an exception of a type in this. Okay. Propofol, the loading which is there now, the loading dose, which I mean, I can write it as induction. That sounds better. So the induction dose of propofol is based upon the lean body weight, and maintenance is based upon the total body weight. This is the reverse. This is an exception. Okay. This one exception you have to remember, that all of these will be following this rule except propofol. Okay. Now, if we have a patient and there's a patient and you want to avoid respiratory depression because of opioid, right? You want to avoid opioid. So you have some other drug options that you can use for analgesia. What can you use? Any options that you know? I can use.
NSAIDs.
Yes, you can use NSAIDs. You can use paracetamol, right? Ketorolac NSAID can be used. You can use this dexmedetomidine, alpha-2 agonist. You can use NMDA receptor antagonist, ketamine, analgesic property, right? So these drugs are quite safe and you can use it for analgesia in the place of using opioids. Okay. Yeah. Now there are hydrophilic drugs. Okay. So these are lipophilic, which we saw. Now there are some drugs which are hydrophilic. So all our muscle relaxants which are there now, they are hydrophilic. Okay. So the hydrophilic drugs means what? There are muscle relaxants. So muscle relaxants such as what? Vec, Roc. Okay. Atrax, etc. Curima, lipophilic. These other ones are hydrophilic. Okay. So for these, the dosing is how the dose for this, the dosing you can use it as lean body weight or ideal body weight. Again, one source is telling to use lean, one source is telling to use ideal. All right. Stoltings is telling this, article is telling this. Okay, so you can mention both, it's okay. Then, the patient for succinylcholine is one thing which is different. So this I've seen from the article only. So succinylcholine dosing has to be based on the total body weight. Okay. If patient weight goes more than 140 kg, no. If the patient weight, so you will do as per total body weight up to 140 kg. Once the patient goes up to 140 kg plus body weight, your maximum dose should become only 120 to 140 mg scoline. This is your upper limit for scoline. Okay. For an obese person. Is this okay?
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Similarly, even neostigmine reversal has to be done on the basis of total body weight. So you can remember these two, scoline and neostigmine are based on the total body weight. Okay. Paracetamol again based on this. Other drugs are based on this. All right. Now in this obese patient, inhalation drugs, so we should avoid to use nitrous. Why? Because pulmonary hypertension already we know is one existing problem in them. Nitrous oxide worsens pulmonary hypertension. N2O. Okay. So you will avoid N2O. Because why? Pulmonary hypertension is one of the cause. Okay. And you will prefer to use, which drugs will you prefer? You will prefer desflurane. Desflurane is your first choice. And sevoflurane is your second choice.
Okay.
ISO avoid. Okay. Because desflurane is got fast in, fast out. Correct? So these drugs are more preferable. Okay. Now, post-op, what care you are supposed to see? Post-op, you should give good analgesia. If your analgesia is not good, their breathing will not be good, right? Mobilization will not be good. Analgesia is very important. how can you give analgesia? You can give local infiltration, you can give nerve blocks, you can give NSAIDs, you can give ketamine, right? You can give Dexmed, paracetamol, right? Then you can give CPAP. You're supposed to give CPAP. So analgesia is done. You're supposed to give CPAP or BiPAP at the end of the surgery afterwards. Okay. If they were taking it before the surgery, they have to continue taking after the surgery also. Okay. Your aim is to mobilize the patient as soon as possible. He should start ambulating. Why? Or else he will be a very high risk for DVT. And you can also start the patient on prophylactic anticoagulants. You can start the patient on compression pumps. All right. Because of the DVT risk. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's it. So here where we complete obesity. And so most importantly, what I see in obesity is that you should really understand the how the cardiac system and the respiratory system are affected. If you know that in and out, you will understand what you're supposed to manage, what you're supposed to evaluate a patient for.
Okay.